Hello and welcome to Voices of BlueScope, where we meet the people who work behind the scenes at BlueScope to create strength every day. I'm your host, Martin Feld. Thank you for listening. Today we're learning about New Zealand Steel's partnership with Road Safety Education, a not-for-profit learning organisation that operates throughout Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is committed to saving lives through the provision of world-class road safety education to youth, in particular through its RYDA program. To learn more about the organisation, its partnership with New Zealand Steel and how it promotes safety and awareness on the road, I'm joined by two representatives from Road Safety Education, Maria Lovelock, General Manager, New Zealand, and Brooke O'Donnell, General Manager, Education and Communications in Australia, along with Vicki Woodley, External Affairs Manager at New Zealand Steel. Thanks to all three of you for joining us today. Starting off with Maria and then moving on to Brooke and finally Vicki, can I get each of you to introduce yourselves?
So I'm Maria Lovelock. I'm the General Manager of New Zealand for Road Safety Education. So I am in charge of looking after all the operations in New Zealand for our charity. We also run the same charity in Australia. So we run as sort of one company across two countries.
I'm Brooke O'Donnell. I'm the General Manager of Education and Communications for the entire Road Safety Education company. So looking after the content and the education materials and communications for both Australia and New Zealand.
I'm Vicki Woodley and I work for New Zealand Steel. I'm the External Affairs Manager and have worked for the company for 32 years. And one of the strands to my role is community relations.
Perfect. Thank you each for that. Starting off with you, Maria, can you give us an explanation of what road safety education is and what its aims are?
Yeah, sure. So our vision is saving lives. So we're really completely focused on saving lives, particularly around on the roads and with young people. So we're very deliberate in focusing on young people just at the start of their journey, often at the time they're starting to get their licence. So in New Zealand, that would relate to Year 12 students predominantly throughout the country. So they're around 16 years of age. They've either haven't started their licence there or they've got their learners or maybe even starting to work on their restricted licence as they go through their journey. And the reason we target that age group is they've got no bad habits yet. You know, they're at the highest, one of the highest risk groups, and we really want to get in there before they form any poor habits and help them understand what goes into being a good and safe driver and how they can set themselves up for success going forward, and to consider things that perhaps aren't covered in normal driving lessons and things like that, or from parents. We cover quite a holistic range of topics in our program, and we don't just cover driver behaviour either. We also cover things like passenger behaviour, because we know that a lot of 16-year-olds are in cars with mates, even sometimes when they shouldn't be. And so it's about getting them to understand how that can affect the mood in the car and some things that they can do to, for example, get out of a situation if they're feeling unsafe and that. So it's fairly holistic in its view. And so for that reason, when we're working in schools, we would work with a whole cohort of Year 12. So we wouldn't just go, we're going to only target the people who have their licence. When we're talking with schools, we ask them to bring their whole Year 12 group out, whether they're driving or not, because it's really, we sort of see it as essential education for that whole age group.
Thank you for that explanation. And shifting to you, Vicki, could you give us some information about New Zealand Steel and its partnership with Road Safety Education? What was the reason? How did it start? How long has it been going for?
New Zealand Steel became a founding sponsor of Road Safety Education, specifically the RYDA program, in 2007. And at that time, we had a number of sponsorships and donations that we do out in the community, and living our bond, it was always important to us that, you know, our communities are our home. So we always look for opportunities to strengthen and make our communities safer for our people in our community and in our workforce. And over 70% of our workforce live in our local communities. So, you know, these are people that drive to and from work every day. So road safety was something that was quite a good fit with our values, I guess.
Talking about local communities, there are rural communities as well. Are there concerns around that, being away from the city?
There is, and I think Maria would also understand and be able to provide more stats around that. But living in a rural community, and I've lived here since I was 5 years old, so I've lived in this community for a long time, and sadly have seen a lot of young people lose their lives on our rural roads. And I think the fact that we don't really have public transport or can't get an Uber or any of those sort of things rurally, you see a lot of young people in the cars pretty early, and while they shouldn't have their friends in their cars, you do see that happen really fast in a rural community.
And turning to you, Brooke, you're based in Australia, so what's your perspective on this, and how does Australia get involved within this story?
So we run the same. Basically, when I say the same program, we run the same program for RYDA all across Australia and all across New Zealand. Obviously, everything is tweaked to meet the individual. So while we say we run the same program, we have set content, but everything is tweaked to meet individual needs. And picking up on Vicki's point of being in rural areas, it's such a high risk area and high risk driving on those rural roads. And it's really important that those drivers and those passengers have access to this kind of education. Quite often when you're in a small town, you have to really go out to get to excursions. The beauty of RYDA is that we come in and we use the local experts and we talk to the students on their own roads, in their own areas, about the issues that they face. So that's really a strength of the RYDA program, being able to go into communities and bring the same quality program to them that happens all around the country.
That's excellent. And it really does feed into what Vicki was talking about with BlueScope and New Zealand Steel's focus on connecting and representing local communities, because if you don't tailor it, I suppose, to different people in different areas, then, what's the point? It's good to have that focus. So returning to you, Maria, can you tell us more about the specific nature and what's taught in the RYDA program? Because I'm interested in that point about going further than the average lesson. How are things adapted or more tailored?
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of people, when they're learning to drive, they'll focus on the mechanics of learning to drive, like how do you change gears, changing lanes, the road code, all the kind of rules and regulations around technicalities and the logistics of learning to drive. But what they won't often cover is things like, how does your mood affect your decision making on the road? So when you're angry and you're behind the wheel, does that affect your driving? Do you speed up when you're angry? If you're upset, if you're tired, all these things that often aren't discussed or taught during a normal lesson. And when I'm saying that too, a lot of New Zealanders are a country of DIYers, and so there is a real culture in New Zealand of mum and dad taught me to drive, I'll teach my kids to drive. So it's very much a majority of people that learn to drive, or young people that learn to drive in New Zealand, are taught by their parents or caregivers. They might get one proper driving lesson, usually like the week before they sit their restricted test, just to make sure that the parents haven't missed anything out. And that's pretty much the length of professional kind of training they get. This is for your sort of middle New Zealand teenager. And so parents often teaching bad habits. They're teaching stuff, because when I was my kids are driving age, and I never went through driving lessons, and so I'm teaching all my bad habits onto my kids. So then it becomes a cycle of bad habits. So things like understanding mood and how that could affect your driving are definitely I would say not often brought up in learning to drive from either a professional driving instructor or a parent. And going on from that, we basically, they come out and do a workshop with us, and we have 6 sessions. So, and they all interrelate with each other. So Mind Matters, which is the mood one, is one of those sessions. But we also have the police come out. They talk all about the graduated licensing system we have here, why it's needed, why the different restrictions are there. And they really focus in on things like fatigue and passengers and phones, which are obviously key things that young people struggle with. Then they'll go outside into a car park area, and we'll do a speed and stopping session, and that looks at all the safety features of a car, what you should be looking at when you're buying your first car, and especially around safety, airbags and things like that. Not just that it looks cool and sounds cool, it should also have safety on the list and what that means. We look at tyres and what that's involved with. And then they do a speed and stopping demonstration. So they're able to look at how fast the car goes at different speeds and really understand the physics behind how fast you go, the longer it takes to stop. So, double your speed, quadruple your stopping distance is one of the key things that they kind of pull out of there. And it's nice and interactive, and it gets them outside, and they really get to see something real as they go. Eye and Drive is one of the other sessions where we look at the personality that people bring into the car, because who you are is also how you drive. So are you a risk taker? Are you someone that's good at speaking up? Do you think socially? Do you think about other people? And all those aspects will affect how you are as a driver. So if you're not particularly strong at thinking socially, you might not be very good with pedestrians and cyclists. You might be impatient. You might not, you might be a bit rude to other drivers. If you are not good at speaking up, then you may be in a situation as a passenger and be quite scared, but not know how to get out of it. And so in that situation, in that session, we focus quite a bit on the speaking up piece, and we do a lot of role playing, and we give them strategies on how they could, even if they're not particularly good at speaking up, how ways that they could do that in an indirect way or using humour, but to get their point across to the driver to try and, to slow down or to change what's happening in the car. And then we do a crash investigation. So we get someone in who's been involved in a serious crash. We go through the whole SAFE system and what that is, and give them an understanding of that it's not just road user decisions, although obviously that's a critical part. It's also what's the road like, what's the roadside like, what's the car they're driving like, what was the speed like, and all those elements go into the severity of the crashes we have in New Zealand. So getting them to understand the elements that goes into the SAFE system, and then we look at a real crash and we look at it through that lens. If that person had been driving a better car, would their injuries be different to what they are? If it was, say fatigue or something, what's coming up in the design of cars that's going to help alleviate fatigue, for example. And there's some good technology coming up that in the development of cars that's being rolled out in Europe, for example, which, so it really kind of empowers them. They form an interview panel and they interview the crash survivor, and they find all this information out, and then put forward some ideas for change of how we could change going forward. And then the Drive SOS session is tagging into that thinking socially aspect of, so not only looking at your peripheral vision and what you need to be aware of when you're driving, not just what's in front of you, but all the things that are going on to the side of you, but also how things like driving around heavy trucks, what are their blind spots? How do you need to adjust your driving to accommodate for their view and their view of the road and their view of you, where they may not see you? And the same with cyclists and pedestrians. So that kind of digs right into that thinking social, driving socially piece. So, Brooke, have I missed anything out there? I feel like I have, so you can probably feel free to jump in there.
I think you pretty much covered it all. I guess the important thing is RYDA kind of gives them the how. A lot of the times they know the what. They know that they're not supposed to use their phones. They know that they're told this stuff ad nauseum and kind of roll their eyes at it. But we get into the how. We get into we recognise that your phones are an important part of your life, but let's look into that further. And how can we manage your phones? What can you do? What kind of reminders can you set yourself? We know that you say, oh, yeah, I'll speak up for myself, but do you really? And how hard is that? And how could you do it in a way that saves your friendships and doesn't cause you all those extra social problems? So it's really digging in on a personal level with them and giving them really individual strategies to manage all of those things that they're kind of told on the surface they should be aware of, but don't really know how, because they haven't got that experience yet.
I have to say that was incredibly comprehensive. So thank you both for that incredible explanation.
Good luck editing that, Martin.
Oh, it'll be a pleasure. Don't worry about that. I think it's fair to say we live in quite a data-saturated world. People really want to quantify things a lot of the time, but you were talking about panels there and using stories, and I think stories resonate a lot more with people, and if people can share their experiences, whether there was a tragic accident on the road or how someone adjusted or did something for the better, that resonates more with people. Do you think the idea of story really helps in teaching people?
Story is really, really important. That's our emotional hook, but story needs to be used really, really carefully. So where you can come into trouble is that story can also cause as much harm as it can positive outcome, depending on how it's used. If you put a person in front of a group of students to just tell them of the horrors of a crash, what a student will tend to do is put up their defences. As humans, when something kind of frightening or hits too close to the bone comes along, we tend to soothe ourselves out of that, tell ourselves that that's okay, it won't be me, I'll be okay. In a way, we're rejecting that message before it's actually hitting in. So the way that we use stories is in that investigative manner. We ask the crash survivor to tell a very straightforward, very small, short snippet of their crash. And then the students have to get into groups and they have to think about all the elements of the safe system. And they have to come up with interview questions and say, what was the car like? Was there people talking a lot? Did you get a lot of sleep last night? How old was the car? What were the roads like? Was the weather? Was it dark? Was it, and think of all of those elements, because if they can pull out the elements, the factors that went into that crash, that's a little small thing that they can say, oh, I can change that. Whereas if you hear a story as a whole that's got a big horrible ending, half the time you lose the bits along the way that you could change, and it just seems too big. Students would walk away thinking, well, there's nothing you could have done about that. They overtook, they were allowed to overtake. Whereas we delve into, well, should they have overtaken? What was going on in the car? That sort of thing. So story is really, really important. It hooks us on an emotional and personal level, but really have to be done very, very carefully, following the evidence of what works and what doesn't.
So you will want to avoid a feeling of powerlessness or that nothing could have been changed. People need to take responsibility and
absolutely
do it positively.
Yep.
That's great.
Absolutely. Or fear. You don't want them afraid by the story, because then they'll reject it.
That's a very, very good insight. And I think a lot of people listening internationally to this would be very interested to hear some of these approaches, because we do approach different things culturally, for better or worse. So this is really interesting what you're sharing here. Turning to you, Vicki, and bringing things closer to BlueScope and New Zealand Steel, naturally a really big focus for companies like ours, in various manufacturing industries, is safety. We want to be safe. We want to make sure that people who come to work leave the same way that they arrived. Road safety here is specifically relating to people learning on the road, but of course people are driving all forms of equipment and different types of transport and vehicle on our manufacturing sites. What are some of the things that you can say about New Zealand Steel's motivation to be part of this, and what are some of the things that have been learnt or adopted maybe in this partnership?
One of the things I think that's really important is the distraction that drivers can face. And so at New Zealand Steel, you cannot use mobile phones while driving equipment. And the other part of our site, which is different, is that vehicles have the right of way, not pedestrians. And that's just because of the layout of our site. So it's not an ideal situation. But when we had the road safety education, the RYDA program, we actually had 200 students from Waiuku College come and run the program. RYDA ran the program on our site. It was actually a really good opportunity even for the students to be able to see that interaction between heavy machinery and people, and you don't get to see vehicles like ours out on the everyday roads. And so part of that understanding what drivers see from the vehicle is really important on our site, because in those large crest drivers and those really big pieces of machinery, you can't actually see even cars beneath you. So, that being aware of what's around you at all times is pretty important on our site.
Yeah, and certainly things, as you said, like crest carriers are much larger than the average car, so different kinds of vehicle and environment entirely.
Yeah.
Maria, are there any things from manufacturing sites that are working with different corporate partners like New Zealand Steel that you learnt that informed your decision-making or method of teaching?
Yeah, I loved that day that we did with Waiuku College out at the BlueScope Steel site, because part of it was being at Waiuku College, which was a local school to the steel mill, and a lot of the parents had their students at that school. So there was parents that came in at lunchtime, which I thought was really nice. It was just a really nice engagement for the parents to see the students learning something at their workplace, which I thought was really unique. And I don't think we've done that with any of our other partners. And I love that kind of whole holistic approach of getting the parents involved in that. We came back out, I think, later in the year at one of your Christmas parties, and one of our sessions, which is Drive SOS, and we got a truck and we did that blind spot thing with some of the staff. And so even some of your staff on site hadn't been into a truck, I don't think. Obviously the ones that do drive trucks are. We put the car in the blind spot and we did a few of those things, and had a sausage sizzle, and that was quite a fun day as well. And just took a snippet of our program and just kind of showed it to some of the staff to kind of give them a kind of a perception of what some of the things that we cover off, and that was really great as well. And I think I think that heavy vehicle aspect is definitely something that has come through. We've added more of that into our Drive SOS session in particular. Probably over the last couple of years, we're doing a little bit more in that, and it's definitely something that's come back through the feedback as well as something that, especially from students that are in areas where there's lots of trucking. So like, for example, Tairāwhiti, there's a lot of logging trucks there. That part of New Zealand, it's a rural New Zealand place with a lot of forestry. And so that you'll often get comments from locations like that from students going, I didn't realise about the blind spots on the trucks. And so definitely you can see that. And even probably in Auckland, I would say around the motorway, they don't understand, especially if they're coming on the inside of a truck, that the truck can't see them and how bad that blind spot is. Things like that definitely we've got from companies like yours to bring that, make that more prominent in the content as we go forward.
It's good to know that you've adapted based on some of those insights. I've been around on some of my own on-site visits and you think, wow, the scale is huge, unimaginable at times. Brooke, Australia and New Zealand are fairly similar in many ways, but are there any things that have had to be adapted between the two locations in terms of road safety and teaching young people?
Apart from the obvious, we obviously try and, we obviously include local culture, but I guess we do that not just between Australia and New Zealand, but regional or metro and state to state in Australia. So I think we're just used to making sure that the important thing is that the message is personal for each and every student that comes along. So it's not really a big broad brush, we need to change this. But obviously, we've adapted and included a lot of the Māori language in New Zealand and that sort of stuff to nod to cultural changes and differences. But I wouldn't say a huge amount, Maria, just based on making sure that we're following the guidelines of the governments and all of that sort of stuff. But it's pretty universal, with the caveat that it's very tweaked to be personal for each student. And every bunch of students you get through, you've got a very mixed bag of experience and thoughts and background and approach. So you really have to meet them all where they are.
Yeah, I think that's true because while Brooke writes the program and she creates all the PowerPoints and it's scripted, we have a very thorough facilitator manual that she puts out every year, but that's half of it, and then the other half is the facilitator that delivers it and the kids that are in the room. So when you're delivering something, it is, because it's facilitator led, it's not just a lecture from the front of the classroom. It's group work, it's discussion, it's panels, it's role plays, peer share activities, that sort of stuff all through each of our sessions. So that will change depending on every day, depending on who you have in the room and who's facilitating it. Facilitators will bring their own flavour to that too. So if you've got a facilitator that's Pacifica or Māori, they might bring some of that more into the way that they facilitate, which is awesome. So yeah, there's layers like Brooke's saying across, so you've got that foundation of content that's all best practice, and then those layers that come in on top.
You definitely want to be able to tailor to your audience. Yeah, absolutely.
And it's important also to note that our RYDA isn't just a day. So we support the school with whole year learning. So we give them some pre-workshop activities and discoveries. We give them post-workshop. They're doing different things in their school. So we really work with the schools to find out a little bit more about where the students are before they get there, and that helps us tailor. So, the RYDA is not learning in a day, because you're not going to get deep learning on a topic like road safety in a day. It has to happen across time, and we support schools to do that.
Yeah, but one of the big things that people ask us is, does it work? That's a kind of a common question. What are the outcomes from this, that you can know that what you're doing, because obviously there's a lot of time and money putting into this, is it actually leading to behaviour change at the end of the day? Are young people making better decisions? And I think one of the things when you're a top of the cliff charity, how do you measure good decisions? It's very easy to measure trauma, but how do you measure when someone has actually not gone out and had too much to drink? Maybe I could pass over to Brooke, and she could we do spend a lot of time on evaluation to look at that. And that's about improving. We're always evolving, so every year we will bring out an updated program, and a lot of that was based on not only our advisory council of international road safety experts that we link in with, but also this evaluation and what's coming out of it, and what are the students picking up, and what do they know before they come in, and that sort of thing. So that's Brooke's baby. So I'll let Brooke talk a little bit about that.
I'll make it a really quick overview of it. I guess the important thing is we had over 7,000 students involved in our evaluation process this year in different types of evaluation tools. One of the tools that we use is a 3-stage evaluation where we measure what they knew before they came in, how they felt and what they thought, and their behaviours before they came in. We ask them again immediately after they attend the workshop, and then we go back to them 3 months later to see where they're at. And what we found this year, particularly this year, when we've really strengthened that whole school approach where we push the messaging out throughout the year, is we got some really, really strong shifts in both knowledge and attitude and intended and practiced behaviour. We saw some great shifts all across the board in those things across 3 months. So usually you would expect a bit of a drop off, but we were even finding from our immediate post to our 3-month post, there really wasn't a lot of dropout off of their understanding and their approach. And just to highlight one that I kind of got a kick out of as I was reading through, we asked about 3,000 students what they were seeing in their own homes. You know, have you noticed your mum and dad distracted by a mobile phone? Have you noticed your driver suffering from fatigue? Have you ever felt unsafe when you're in the car with your parents? So we took a lot of those and we got some interesting responses to that. You know, over 50% for most of them had seen those behaviours. Then we asked parents, you know, how many of your kids came home and talked to you about RYDA? About 95% said they did. And then we looked at and we said, okay, we'll get a little bit cheeky now. How many of your kids have started picking you up on your driving behaviours after RYDA? And I think it was around the 43% of parents said that their children had started picking them up on their driving behaviour. So it just really ties into that, the fact that we're seeing those results. It's making change in the home and it's changing the culture, not just the student, which is really important.
And that completely speaks to what you were talking about, positive messaging, because behavioural change, to say don't do something is obviously a lot less powerful than saying to do something. So you're obviously having a great positive effect there. Thank you for that summary. Just turning to Vicki for a sec. Vicki, is there anything about New Zealand Steel and your corporate partnership that you would like to wrap up with?
No, I think we do an evaluation each year as well when we look at where we put our money each year for sponsorships and stuff. And I think for me, the road safety program has just gone from strength to strength. And just seeing and knowing a lot of those young students who go through those programs, and my grandson being one of them, seeing that they actually are changing what they do and they are more aware of when they're in the car what that means. And I think, like you, Martin, probably when I learnt to drive, those sort of things weren't something that I paid attention to myself. And I suppose I've been lucky through my relationship with Maria and the program that I get to see firsthand some of the programs, you know, during the days that they run. I go and sit in on some of those sessions. So it's been really valuable for me to see probably the value of our sponsorship with the road safety program.
Well, I think that's a fantastic spot to finish. I just want to thank each of you for your time today and discussing what is a very important topic, not just safety broadly, but teaching safe driving and decent positive behavioural change. Thank you very much for joining us, and it's been a pleasure to have you on the episode.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you. And we couldn't do what we do without our partners, so a big thanks to NZ Steel.
And thank you to everyone listening to this instalment of Voices of Blue Scope. For more information about New Zealand Steel and road safety education, make sure to visit this episode's show notes in your browser or podcast app. Catch you next time.